Hey, how you doing? It's time for another quick tech. If you're thinking about buying some vintage Fender pickups, or if you've got some in an instrument of your own, then there's a couple of tests you should do. And one of them is one that, well, I've pretty much never seen mentioned or talked about on forums and user groups and stuff, but it's something I always do with old Fender pickups. So I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. It's super simple. You just need a multimeter. So I think most people know that when you're buying a second-hand pickup, it's really important to test the coil itself and make sure you get an appropriate resistance. 5.7 k ohms is about right. This is an early 70s P Bass pickup, and when this is wired into the instrument, they're in series, and 11.5 k ohms is about right for that era of pickup as far as I know. If you do measure a resistance that's too high or even open circuit, it doesn't necessarily mean the pickup needs rewinding. It may just have a dry solder joint. It does happen, but more often than not, yeah, it means the pickup needs rewinding. The other thing, the other little test you should do if you're looking at buying, say, a set of pickups or buying a split coil pickup is to make sure that you have a north coil and a south coil. This guy is showing a south deflection, and this one is showing a north deflection. You can get little magnetic testers. I just use a cheap compass from a camping store. That works fine. Obviously, it's the same deal if you're buying a set of Jazz Bass pickups. You should have a north and a south coil, or Telecaster pickups. The center pickup in a Strat should be the same. It should read the opposite from the outer two. Having said that, if you are looking at a set of really early Fender pickups, or you're thinking about investing in an instrument from the sort of first half of the 50s, well, I don't think those Strats and Tellies necessarily had hum cancelling sets of pickups. In fact, I think the early Strats just had a three-way switch, so you didn't really need a hum cancelling pickup in the middle there, because you didn't really have the option of having more than one pickup on at any one time anyway. So I assume the early Tellies or broadcasters or whatever they were called were the same. By 57, they had reworked the P Bass and then brought out the split coil pickup, and as far as I know, these have always been hum cancelling, and I think that the Jazz Bass pickups were the same right from the start, which I think was 1959. But yeah, look, I'm not really a Fender historian. If you do know if there was kind of an official date or year when they switched to hum cancelling sets in Strats and Tellies, do let me know in the comments. I've asked about it on forums and stuff for years and never really got a definitive answer. There may well not actually be a definitive answer. It's a good talking point though. Anyway, I'll show you this third test. It's really easy and super important. So the problem with vintage Fender pickups, or certainly grey bobbin or earlier pickups, as far as I can tell, the problem with them is that Fender, for whatever reason, didn't tape the magnets. So just about every other pickup winder, maker, repairer in the world, when they have a Fender style bobbin like this with just magnets and flat work, prior to winding it or rewinding it, they'll actually just put a thin layer of tape over the magnets, and that's to create a very fine but reliable barrier between the magnets and the inside of the coil. Fender never did that. They, for whatever reason, just, I think, sprayed them quickly with lacquer, or even, it might have even just been shellac or something. You can see it on vintage bobbins often. You can see it sort of on the magnets there. It tends to chip off pretty easily. And what happens with that is that over the years, these pole pieces, these magnets, start to corrode, especially from the top down, where they're exposed to people's hands and the environment. And Alnico, well, it's ferrous, obviously, so it's going to rust or corrode. And gradually over time, that corrosion will creep down the magnets past the flatwork and into where the windings are. And over time, that corrosion will gradually eat away the insulation on the winding wire. This is winding wire here. This is typical 42 gauge or 0.06 winding wire. It's about as thick as a human hair, and these will typically have anything from 5,000 to 10,000 turns on them. And you can imagine, just if the wire is that thin, just how thin and delicate the actual insulation on this wire is. And even more so with vintage wire. This wire has a modern polymer on it which is actually quite robust, but this dark purplish looking, they call it plain enamel wire, on these old grey bobbin pickups is actually pretty fragile, especially after 50 odd years. And when the insulation on those inner windings starts to break down, well, it exposes that very delicate wire underneath to that corroded area, and then eventually the corrosion will just break that very fine wire, and the coil's dead. So something I always do with vintage Fender pickups is I actually see if I can measure a resistance between the magnets and either end of the coil. So I'm actually getting about 55 megohms, a bit less on some of these pole pieces, 40, 24 meg. You've got to make sure you're not touching the probes, because even just the resistance from your body will be less than that. And again, this coil still works, the pickup still works as is, but what it means is that that corrosion has already broken down the insulation in that wire and is on its way to breaking down the wire itself. Now, if your multimeter has registered a measurement of a resistance, what that really means is that it's been able to essentially pass a current from one probe to the other. But if the magnets and the winding wire are properly isolated or insulated, then that shouldn't happen. It should be an open circuit, or what you'd call an infinite resistance, I guess. As for the actual measurement you get, well, I don't know how you'd really interpret that, but it's safe to say that the lower the resistance, the more that those inner windings have become compromised. I guess if it's below 10 meg or even down to 5 meg ohms, then that may influence your decision about whether or not to get it rewound and repaired. If you've got an old multimeter like this, which isn't auto-ranging, you want to set the resistance range, well, to the highest range it has, and in this case it's 200 meg ohms. The other thing I should say is that you can actually do this third test with the pickups in the guitar in most cases. You want to just solo the pickup with a selector switch, turn the volumes and tones and everything all the way up, and then put, well, obviously one probe on the magnet and the other probe you put on the tip of the guitar lead. The only time I think that would give you a false reading is if someone's modified the pickups. I know in the bass world it's not uncommon to connect the pole pieces to earth with a piece of copper foil. And the other time you might get a false reading is if someone's put, say, an active preamp in the guitar. If you do measure a resistance between the magnets and the windings, well, the first thing I'd say is don't panic. There's every chance the pickup will work just fine for years to come. So if the guitar just lives in your climate control recording studio or music room or something, and you don't actually rely on that instrument, if it's just something you pick up for certain tracks, then I'd say, judging by the value of these vintage Fenders, I'd say just keep it original. Keep it as original as possible. On the other hand, if you play gigs with the instrument, you tour with it, you teach with it, and you really rely on it, then you're going to have to make a decision about that pickup. Just about every city in the world will have a pickup nerd like me or two, and so just ask around. There's every chance you'll find someone who can rewind the pickup in a sympathetic way and make it sound and look just as good as it should. And that's a decision that I'm going to have to make with this pickup, because it's actually from my own Fender P Bass, my 73 Fender P Bass. So if I do decide to rewind it, keep an eye out for that. I'll probably make a video about it. But I hope in the meantime that you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.